After the June 67 war, Israel occupied the Egyptian Sinai as well as the Golan Heights and parts of what was then Jordan, namely the West Bank. And the main goal of the Egyptians in particular was to recover the lands which were occupied. In February 1971, there was a lot of UN diplomacy at this time, in particular by a fellow named Gunnar Yaring. And in 1971, Yaring got fed up shuttling back and forth with the Israelis, and they said this, and the Egyptians said that, and finally he said, "The hell with this. I'm going to just set down the terms for settling this conflict, and I'm going to just ask you, do you agree to these terms or not?" And the essential term that the Israelis said they wanted, they said, "We want a peace treaty. We want a clear peace treaty." Well, and the essential term of the Egyptians was, "We want our land back. We want the Sinai back." So those are the terms that Gunnar Yaring set out in February 1971. He went to the Egyptians. He said, "Look, guys, you want your land back? You have to sign a peace treaty with Israel." Anwar Sadat said, "Okay, I'll do it." Great, half job done. Gunnar Yaring then goes to the Israelis, and he says, "Okay, you want a peace treaty with Israel? You have to return to Sinai." And the famous Israeli reply was, "We will not return to the pre-June 1967 borders." So at this point, Anwar Sadat kept threatening that he was going to attack Israel. "If you don't give me back the land and I offered you a peace treaty, I'm going to attack. But the Israelis didn't take it seriously because, in the famous Israeli expression, they said at the time that war is not an Arab game. As a matter of fact, the Israeli troops, refer to the Arab soldiers as monkeys. That was their epithet in referring to the Egyptians. They were very confident that the Egyptians, or the Arabs generally, didn't have a war option. Sadat kept threatening a war, and in October 1973, what's called a surprise attack was probably the least surprise attack in the history of warfare, because he kept saying he's going to do it for 2 years. And he went ahead, he attacked. He never attacked Israel. That's a mistake. All he did was the Egyptian troops, he just wanted them to get to the other side of the Suez Canal in order to create an international crisis which would force Israel to withdraw in exchange for the peace treaty, which is basically what did happen. The famous trip by Anwar Sadat to Jerusalem had nothing whatever to do with why Israel returned to Sinai. The reason Israel returned to Sinai was pretty straightforward. Namely, contrary to one of my favorite bloggers, Assad Abu Khalil, the angry Arab, the Egyptian military performance in 1973 was quite impressive. And they didn't win at the end, but it was an impressive military performance. And the Israelis began to panic because they knew a next round was inevitable if they didn't return the territories they occupied. And they weren't quite confident that in the next round they would make out all that well. So the only option for the Israelis was, well, if war is inevitable and we may not make out so well, we have to negotiate a settlement with someone. And the famous line by Moshe Dayan in his memoir, he said, and I'll quote him now, "If you take one wheel off a car, it won't drive. If Egypt is out of the conflict, there will be no more war." So they decided to settle the conflict with Egypt and thereby remove Egypt from the Arab war front, thereby preempting any Arab war option. And that was what they did, and they got exactly what they had been offered in February 1971. They fully withdrew from the Sinai, and in return they got the peace treaty with Israel. Now there's been a lot of speculation about whether or not an Egyptian revolution would renounce the peace treaty, the 1979 Arab-Israeli peace treaty. I think it's very unlikely for two reasons. Number one, it's just the nature of the modern world that you can't renounce treaties very easily. It's very tough. Even governments which come to power through revolutions, they can't even renounce their debts. the debts of the former corrupt state. They have to take on those debts, even though they had, even though there was complete corruption in the incurring of those debts. And it's very, very hard to renounce a treaty. I've searched my memory. Maybe people in this panel will know better than me, but I can't think of a single example of a insurrectionist government which was able to renounce a prior peace agreement. None comes to mind.
The Bolsheviks.
Well, the Bolsheviks is actually not a very good example. I'm not going to try to pull my, lord it over, but if you read E.H. Carr's, the third volume on the Bolshevik Revolution, they were pretty good for about a month. And then they started to sign secret treaties because they had to. That's just the way the modern world works.